Today I'm relating stories from this book, The Breach of Ste Marie du Mont, and that's what Utah Beach was called before it became known as Utah Beach. That's a collection of eyewitness stories from the local French people. Many of you might say, well, that couldn't have happened there, or that action happened otherwise. I'm just telling the stories as they're written. I'd like to give a special thanks to my Patreons, and of course those who give a like, share, pass comments, or tap subscribe, plus the bell to be informed of new videos. In 1944, the Madeleine had a shop, a school, a café, and a working chapel. Today it's just a satellite hamlet of Ste Marie du Mont, and it's just behind Utah Beach. Pierre Lenoury was woken by the first bombing raid, and as it was on the coast, he went back to bed. He was soon woken up rudely by a bomb hitting the house and the house collapsing around him and his family. Now, he was okay, but his wife was covered in the rubble. He was frantically excavating with his hands, and then he found her safe. She'd been protected by a slab of wall. And then he found the oldest child, and the baby was sound asleep in his cot. So they went next to a wall outside the house for shelter. Around 3:30, a group of paratroopers arrived. They make him keep his hands up while they search the house, or the remains of it. Then they go off. And then Pierre thinks to go and check if the barrel of cider is okay. So he goes to find it in the cellar, and it's okay. So he thinks he'll have a drink with the glass that's always there. And then another. After some time, his wife wondered where he got to. She went to go and find him, but he's nowhere to be seen. He must be dead, she thought. But he wasn't. He'd gone out the back door to look towards the beach, and a soldier turned up and took him to the beach and put him in a compound with the German prisoners. After half an hour, a soldier came to collect him, and they interrogated him. "Can you show me where the guns are?" He was pleased to show them on the map, and then he put him back in the compound with the Germans. Another inhabitant of the Madeleine was Paul Gazengel. He was the owner of the café. He was woken by the bombing, and seeing it was on the coast, he went back to bed. They were soon rudely awakened when the roof got blown off. Him and his wife and his daughter, they went to an air raid shelter with the neighbours. Then they heard English being spoken. "Hey, it's the Tommies." But their delight was soon quelled when one of the neighbours' wives got wounded in the throat, and then a grenade exploded by the faggots near their shelter. He went to the exit and said, "We're Frenchmen. And there were soldiers out there, and they didn't seem to believe him. He was worried they were going to shoot him. So he said, "Martha, Daphne, come and show yourself so they can see we're French." So the women came out, and the Americans understood. So Paul Gazengel was taken off to the beach. He was surprised to see Lenoury in the compound with the Germans, and they took them both to be interrogated. A soldier came up who could speak French. He asked him some questions, and Paul told them that the Germans had been digging the fields to put mines in, but they hadn't had time to finish, and so the fields weren't dangerous. Pierre and Paul were taken to the command post. They were amazed to see there were typewriters being tapped on. There were men swarming over the beach. The beach was still under fire from WN10 and from Breakwalk Manor. And they show the Americans where the gun batteries are and where the Germans are housed. And then they're asked to stay there, so they're in a foxhole on the dunes. And then a shell comes in, and they're both wounded. Paul says, "Hey, we're going to get buried alive." Near WN10 St Martin, Vierville, the farmer was Mr Berthot. The commander of the strong point, Lieutenant Wolf Maidam, he would say, "The English can come, but they won't get me." And he'd say, "What if they come by the air? They still won't get me. They won't take me alive." There were 6 guns, one to fire out to sea, and the others to fire along the beach in enfilade. Just after midnight on the 5th, 2 paratroopers arrived. Berthot showed them where the guns were. They went to find their lieutenant. When he came back, Berthot showed them where the mines were, and the guns, and the telephone lines. And the officer said, "Cut the telephone lines." And then he left. And as Berthot was cutting them, he thought, "I hope this isn't going to be like Dieppe again." The parachutists wanted to attack the strong point, but they lacked the necessary weapons. It wasn't until the evening of the 6th that the 4th Division, using phosphorus shells, managed to overcome the strong point. Only one prisoner was taken alive, so neither the English nor the Americans had made them alive. So Berthot gets taken to Utah Beach with Gazengel, Lenoury, the 5 others. Gazengel is a bit of a big mouth, he starts mouthing off. He says, "I'm not staying here, I'm going to go home and sleep with my wife." The American was a bit shocked at his speech, but he says, "You're not going anywhere, you're coming to England." He said, "Oh great, a free cruise, Tower of London, whiskey." He said, "I have to go and tell my wife though." So the soldier was sent off to get his wife, and they were on the way to the beach to go with him. But then her and her daughter saw the head of a soldier getting blown off, and the daughter wouldn't move any further, so they didn't go. It was just as well, because the cruise was a bit long and hard. They had to wade up to their armpits to get to a landing craft. Then they were transferred to a ship and another ship, and they got to Weymouth 4 days later. Now they were interrogated many times, even by the Free French. One day, someone said to him, "What are you doing here?" He said, "That's what I'd like to know." They were amazed at the way that the British got on with the V1s and the bombing raids, as if nothing was happening. It was 4 weeks later, they got back to Omaha Beach. At Ste Marie du Mont, Captain Glube liked playing cards and drink too much. "I won't fight," he would say. "There'll be no battle at Ste Marie du Mont." The sound of planes was heard. Around midnight, some Germans crossed the square, pulling a big sheet of cloth. They'd found a parachute. Madame Cousin saw a paratrooper hit the power lines and then the floor. He was lucky the power was off, but then he might be dead. He wasn't moving. There were 2 Germans up the church. They must have seen him. After 10 minutes he hadn't moved, but then he jumped up and ran out of town. Madame Meurde was listening to the sounds in the street. She could hear the sound of hobnailed boots and leather boots running down the road. Then a gunshot. Later they found the body of young Oscar, who liked to do the garden for the officers. The commander of Holdy Battery was billeted at the Manir de Brucheville. In the evening of the 5th he went out. Shortly afterwards he sent his orderly back to fetch his raincoat. The orderly said to Madame Gosselin, "The captain told me to tell you he won't be coming back." At Holdy, 4 paratroopers approached the house. Madame de Gouchet said to her husband, "As it's not the Krauts, I'm going to bed." The paratroopers asked, "Have you got Germans here?" "No, there's an office, 2 lieutenants and 40 men in the village. They've all gone to the battery." The paratroopers searched the house, then asked where the battery was, then asked him to take them. He showed them the way, and one wanted to advance closer. De Gouchet said, "You'll get wiped out." The American advanced a bit and was wounded in the face. They went back to the Holdy farm. An officer had arrived. He asked, "Where was the battery?" "I've just come back with 4 men. It's there on your map. You're going to attack. Not from the front though, you'll have heavy casualties. You should go round the village." The officer took some men up towards the battery and placed them where they couldn't be seen. He said they should keep up constant fire, but not to advance. He went along the road towards Ste Marie du Mont and placed himself by a bank about 50 yards from the guns. As the men kept up a steady rain of fire from the far hedge, he could pick off the Germans at ease. He shot 37 men. The paratroopers shot 7 and 3 were taken prisoner. The captain who lodged at Brucheville Manor never went back. Between Vierville and Ste Marie du Mont was a big house called La Fisé, where Monsieur and Madame Veyrac lived. They'd been obliged to live in a few rooms on the first floor, while the Germans took over the rest. When the bombing started, the Germans went to a trench by the road to Brucheville and took the family with them. After the bombing raid, they came back to the house. A German soldier had found a container dropped by a plane. He asked Monsieur Veyrac what was written on it. Biscuits, he told them. Perhaps they're poisoned. I doubt it. They must be for the English soldiers. Monsieur Veyrac went upstairs and said to his wife to clear up, as the English army would be here at any minute. He went across the yard to get some water from the pump and saw some paratroopers running into the woods. He went back upstairs and they locked the door. A German knocked on the door. He asked them to treat a wound on the orderly's head. As they cleaned his wound, he was nibbling at American biscuit. The officer was pretty hard on his men, but the orderly had a frail disposition and was given an easy task to do. The Germans were fighting the paratroopers in the woods, while the orderly sat in the corridor eating biscuits. He was curious to see what was going on, so he opened a window. A shot hit him in the forehead, and he smashed against the wardrobe before crumpling to the floor. Downstairs, the accountant had stayed to guard the documents. He opened a window, taking the precaution of picking up a pistol first. He saw a paratrooper not far away and emptied the magazine at him. This was the first time he'd fired at anyone. His action sent him into shock. I think I've killed someone. I don't want to fight anymore. He laid on the floor as if he was dead. The paratroopers pushed the Germans out of the woods. A paratrooper came into the house, firing at doors before opening them. In one room he saw the accountant on his bed and shot him. Upstairs he opened doors after firing at them. One door was hard to open because Monsieur de Veyrac's body was blocking it. "You've killed my husband," cried Madame de Veyrac. Monsieur de Veyrac had been listening at the door when the paratrooper fired at it. He said, "Don't stay there. Come with me." He told her to stay with the medic, but she went off to the gatehouse to the Le Bruyere family. "They've killed my husband," she sobbed. They went back to the house and lifted his body onto the bed. She took his identity card and was going to take his watch, but it had gone. Thanks to the mayor, Vierville had managed not to supply any men to the obligatory work service. In the evening of the 5th of June, a bomber crossed over and bombed the Caen to Cherbourg railway. Later they could hear the constant bombing towards the coast. They thought it was the gun batteries at Martin de Varaville, but it was the beach defences that had been designated as Utah Beach. The flak guns are busy, then they see balls in the sky, then that they are paratroopers. Then they see small groups coming through the village. There have been no Germans in Vierville since May, but the surrounding villages have plenty. Jean-Baptiste Vrac, the local policeman, met 9 paratroopers. "Where are we?" "Are the Germans?" "They are at the La Fisé, and the HQ is at La Maïdière, near Ste Marie." Everybody is out to see what's happening. They can see the gliders in the marshes, some full of men, others with jeep or guns. The locals help extract the jeeps from gliders. They ask the way to get to Pont-Perra. Mr Goudard gets in a jeep and shows them the way. They're doing 50 miles an hour in the lanes. He loses his hat on a bump. To Mr Goudard they ask, "We want to go to La Borme at Heisville, where the Langlois live." Goudard was amazed. They know the houses and who lives there. At 6 in the morning, Goudard and David are sharing out cigarettes with the other villagers. An American asks Goudard if he's got some wine. He goes in to get a bottle, then harnesses the horse to the carriage. Goudard and his eldest son are happy to go and see what's happening, and the American is happy with his bottle of wine. Suddenly a shot rings out from a sniper, and the son is hit. Goudard took his son to La Baume, where the medics were. His mother came, and a chaplain gave him extreme unction. He was operated on the kitchen table. The surgeon said to Madame Goudard, "He's mostly American now. We've given him 2 transfusions." Raymond was hanging on to life by a thread, but in the evening of the 7th, he died. In the evening of the 6th, the Germans started moving into town again. Some went into the Gamma house. Monsieur Gamma shouted out, "There are no Boches here." His wife elbowed him in the ribs. "Shut up, they are the Boches." Luckily, the Germans didn't understand. By morning, the Americans were back in town, but the Germans were pushing back. They'd gone round Vierville to attack from the marshes. In the house of the Vrac, which was just opposite the road to Heisville, 2 Germans came in and set up a machine gun on a table by the window. They found the field of fire wasn't suitable, so they went to the next room. An American was about to throw a grenade at the Germans, who hadn't seen him, but he saw there were civilians and stopped. There was house-to-house and garden-to-garden fighting. The Germans felt they could hold out better in the chateau. A German on the first floor of the school was badly wounded. He took his knife to cut his clothes to make a bandage to stop the blood flow, but died before he could use it. In Madame de Beau's house, a German took off his uniform, put on civilian clothes, left his papers, and crept out of town. The Americans set up a machine gun in the Vierville farm opposite the church, and one in the alley to the chateau. Around 10 a.m, a Sherman tank arrives and fires at the church tower. The Germans are forced out the chateau and are now backed against the floods. Towards evening, the last Germans pull out and the battle for Vierville was finished. The Germans occupied the Chateau Colombière at Heisville until a week before D-Day. The chateau had been chosen as the site of a hospital by the Americans. The owner, Madame Cotel, was asked for permission to use it. Around 2 a.m, a glider crash-landed in a field. There was a jeep inside with the colonel in it. He was in a bad state with 3 fractures of his leg. The son of the chateau, Germain Cotel, helped get the man out the glider. They were the first wounded in the hospital. Some German prisoners were brought to be held in a compound. 2 lieutenants asked Germain the way to the strong point of St Martin de Varaville. That's WN10. He told them that it was 8 miles away, and he asked him to show them the way in a jeep. At Hauteville-la-Herbière, there was a battle going on. Germain waited in a ditch until it was over. He saw the bodies of some Georgian German soldiers who had been attacked with a machete. At WN8, Germain was amazed to see the hordes of soldiers and the sea covered in boats. His mission as a guide over, he set off on foot towards Heisville. He avoided any places where fighting was going on. At a junction of lanes about half a mile from the chateau, he was stopped by some Germans. "Monsieur, are there Americans in the chateau?" Before he could reply, a bullet was between them. Paratroopers the other side of a small wood brought down a hail of fire on them. Germain was in a ditch. Anyone who showed themselves got hit. Germain could hear a German machine gun behind him and the bullets passing over him. Then he felt the shock as the bullet passed along his foot from the heel to the toes. He jumped up and dived over the hedge bank. Miraculously, he wasn't hit. Shortly afterwards, 2 Germans who tried to do the same thing fell dead next to him. After half an hour, the fight subsided rapidly. About 50 Germans left, abandoning their weapons. Prisoners were taken. Germain tried to hobble along but couldn't get far. Some medics came from the chateau. He soon found himself in his own bed. The hospital was in full operation. Surgeons were operating, medics treating wounded. Wounded that needed time of convalescence were evacuated to England. The German prisoners carried out chores and buried the dead. In the evening of the 9th, a German plane flew over. It must have seen a big red cross in the courtyard. A few minutes later it came back, diving down and loosed off 2 bombs. The operating tent was flattened and 15 surgeons killed. Many wounded were killed. The second bomb exploded in the field, causing a huge crater. 7 prisoners were killed, and many others took the chance to escape, taking American weapons. A manhunt was on, running between the tents and even in the corridors of the chateau. There was a rumour afterwards that 1,000 prisoners were executed. If you appreciated these stories, let it be known in the comments. There's more of these, and don't forget to give a thumbs up and subscribe. See you soon.